Hi, and so welcome to episode 61 of Smuggling Hope. And I really appreciate you joining me this week. And so today we're going to talk about the role that food plays on mood and the power that it has, because there's a lot of confusion about this, and there's a lot of simple things people can do that can improve their mood function. And I think a lot of times people are just unfamiliar with the role that food plays in their mental health, and especially, and there's just a lot of confusion about it. So I'll tell you a little story from a case log from years ago. I had worked with an individual, and they had expressed that they had had terrible amounts of depression, and at times they wanted to kill themselves, and they couldn't sleep, and they oftentimes said they would wake up multiple times throughout the night, had terrible insomnia and fibromyalgia. And so after a couple weeks of working with this person, they just didn't seem to get better. They were then given a referral to a psychiatrist for medication. They began medication, but it didn't relieve the problems of the sleep, and it did not resolve the issues of the migraines. And subsequently, like after many months, like maybe 6, 7 months, they came in and they had gone grocery shopping before they had come into the clinic for the appointment. And I noticed that the individual had like 2 liters of Pepsi Cola. And I said, it was, the clinic I worked at was close to a grocery store, so it wasn't uncommon for people to, as they went and got their groceries, they would, sometimes end up bringing them to their appointments because, they would jump on the bus after their appointment. So I said, like, "Oh, you having a party?" He says, "No, I drink this every day." Now, this individual, come to find out after months of working together, was drinking on average, 2 to 3 2 liters of Pepsi Cola, and that effect, I think it was diet Pepsi Cola too, and I don't know if that has an effect. We can debate about that maybe. And so we had talked about that, about how he could kind of reduce that down and then get rid of the Pepsi Cola or the soda from his life, the pop. I'm from Buffalo, so we call that pop. And once he eradicated his use of this, the Pepsi, he was a completely different person. His mental health symptoms went away. His energy levels came back. His insomnia went away. His pain went away. The migraines went away. All the symptoms went away, just by removing the intense amounts of this one key ingredient, which was the Pepsi. Now, again, I'm not saying Pepsi's bad, but drinking two or even 3 2 liters of Pepsi Cola a day is obviously going to have an effect on your kidneys, your liver, obviously all your organs. So I want you to keep this in mind, because we put things into our body and we don't really understand how emotions work. I think a lot of people, even in my field, a lot of times we misunderstand where emotions come from, how we feel, what's going on. And we don't have an awareness of how what we consume interacts with us. So one overarching theme in what I'm going to talk about is, number one, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not giving you health advice. I'm not your dietitian, so I'm not giving you dietary advice. I'm just going to present you with information. If you want to go deeper into all this information, because this is not a giant endeavor, this is not like a 4-hour podcast. This is just an overlay of simple things for you, simple tools for you to know how your body works with food. Look up the research on your own afterwards and go to examine.com. That's a way that you can access a lot of the peer-reviewed research on some of the things we're going to talk about. So that's where I get, the information. I don't just generate it from myself. That's not what it is. So, but I encourage you to look this stuff up if you're really interested, or if you're a nerd like me or whatnot. I'm going to, do my best to explain this in the simplest and most pragmatic way possible. But I want you to know where the information is coming from, or where you can get it or get clarity over it. So, examine.com, and that's a free resource, right? So a lot of researchers or professors in different studies, they end up getting access to PubMed, but I don't really want you to have to submit or subscribe to that and pay however much money a month for that. So easier way to do it. So on with the show. So I want to go over emotions first. So emotions are what really connects the mind and body together. And primarily how emotions are not just something that just comes out from our mind, although that is one component psychologically. They are a response to activity and events inside the body as well, right? And so and there are different sensory experiences that we have, and things that we can do to interact with our bodies, and foods that will interact with our bodies that alter and change our mood, give us more energy, less energy, make us feel happier or sadder based on what we consume. And I think this is incredibly useful information, because I'm in America. This is a time in the world where we are primarily a pharmaceutical nation. The rate at which people, they advocate for the use of pharmaceuticals, even versus psychotherapy, right? So many people in our country, the primary mode of operation for mental health is to give people pills. Not against medicine. Obviously, I would take it. I've encouraged many people to take it. I wished more people would take it sometimes. But that is one form of intervention, and it is the primary and almost absolute form of intervention for people's mental health. But what if you learn something about food or your diet or the way that you digest that could have profound effects on improving your own mood or your longevity or your rate of cancer? So we really want to educate ourselves on things. So there are two key ways that emotions work for the most part from an evolutionary standpoint. Emotions either attract things, right? Like, we feel drawn to certain things. We want to get closer to things, or we want to push things away. And so our body has, different sensory cues to make us be more interested in whether it's approach our spouse to kiss them, or our child, or to be interested in our work, or to go to the gym, or apply to that for that new job, or it's to freeze, which is really to avoid. We freeze, we avoid, we escape, and that all. Those are the two, directions usually of emotional life, right? And so there are no good or bad emotions. And so I just want you to think of them as more of a directional pull, and not as some form of judgment, like, oh, this is a good emotion to feel happy, and it's a bad emotion to feel sad. That's not the way that I want you to be thinking about emotions in general. Think about them as a directional, experience. Now, the body, just the basic biological understanding of how the brain and body work is, in your brain, there is a nerve called the vagus nerve. It is the longest nerve. I think it's the longest cranial nerve of the body. And again, it goes from your brain, right? And it gets information from your heart, gets information from your lungs, gets information from your stomach, your intestines, and it gets information from your immune system. So if things happen in the body, right, things are happening with your heart, communicates to your brain, and vice versa, right? And so the body organs for digestion, body organs like your heart, these interactions, these responses to both can generate different experiences interiorly for us, right? And it creates, the body and the brain create different neurochemicals, neuromodulators, which is just a fancy word for chemicals in the body that will alter our state, and they will drive different behavior, or they activate organs, right? It tells the heart to relax, tells the lungs to breathe more deeply, or the stomach to digest, or to send white blood cells to kill an infection. So that's how these things operate. So the two main things that we'll talk about, just to kind of jump into first, is that we have two different systems. We have an alert system, an awake system, something that kind of creates motivation, interest, makes us want to pursue things, pursue a new job, go out for soccer, date this girl, whatever it is. And that system of alertness and awakeness is dopaminergic, right? Dopamine is associated with that sense of go, 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 right? And so obviously, like, for people, Sometimes people feel depressed, and they feel like their mood is low, and they really, they really want to be able to have the energy to go out and do things and to pursue things and to clean their house. The dopamine level is low. And so one thing that is very helpful with that, in terms of activating, the experience of dopamine, is the cultivation of an ingestion of more of a compound called L-tyrosine, right? So L-tyrosine has been around for a long time, right? And essentially it is associated with increasing our motivation and our mood and our movement, right? And I think a lot of times, like when we think about these things, you can get these things as supplements, but that's not what you want to look at like your own diet and the dietary experiences that you have. But the L-tyrosine, you're going to find that in things like poultry or fish, chicken. You'll also see it in other things, right? So you'll see it in bananas, you'll see it in milk, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds. So I watch my wife take in some of these things. I'm not a big seed person, but my wife may not really get into avocados, and avocados have tyrosine, and these things can increase our brain's L-dopa. L-dopa is the precursor to dopamine. So it gives the brain the resources to make more dopamine, if that makes sense. And then so more dopamine, means you're going to have more energy, and more interest and desire, to pursue, engagement with people, your career, your spouse. So that is the dopamine system. So a lot of times, if you think about it from a dietary perspective, or at least in terms of a behavioral management perspective, is consuming foods like that. And again, you have to figure out what will work for you. Look up like L-tyrosine, the foods that contain it on your own, and what your palate and what you prefer and what you can tolerate. There are some people that choose only vegetables or non-meat products. Some people, so you'll find whatever it is that works for your diet and your biome. Because you got to realize that every person watching this podcast has their own genetic makeup and preferences and ethics around food, right? What they choose to eat, what they can tolerate eating. We'll talk a little bit about that near the end of the podcast, about the gut biome and why sometimes these things shift, change, and sometimes even foods become intolerant. So you want to look for ways to kind of, again, if you're going to ingest L-tyrosine through meats or poultry or yogurt or whatnot, those different compounds or seeds, certain seeds, pumpkin seeds, like I said, sesame seeds, those things maybe earlier in the day, if you're a person who wants to have that alertness, that motivation in the day. So you're go, 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 and have that energy. And for me, that's why I encourage a lot of people to have healthy proteins and fats in the morning, because proteins and fats in the morning, that those compounds produce that L-dopa, right? So that's a simple way to view it, is that proteins and fats in the morning produce more of that give us more of this L-tyrosine, and it makes us alert and awake for longer periods of time. Now, so that's one form, is the dopaminergic system, the alert system. I'm awake, I'm motivated, I desire to engage, right? So this is the opposite of feeling depressed. So think about it if you're depressed, you don't have motivation, you don't want to get out of bed. So now think about this from the American diet standpoint. So the other system is the serotonergic system, which is essentially like the people in neurobiology will call it like rest and digest. This system of satiety and feeling calm, right? So it's a calming experience, right? So for people to feel calm, organized experience. And so serotonin has a high like engagement of within the gut and into the brain, right? And so sometimes people say that serotonin is produced in the gut, and sometimes this can be misleading. But the metabolism of certain foods, right? So in this case with serotonin, we're looking at carbohydrates and dense starches that produces triggers to the brain to produce serotonin, right? And so it's not that serotonin is necessarily produced in the gut itself, but that the activation, right, the sensory information from your gut goes to your brain to produce serotonin. Okay. And based on how the gut works and how your stomach and your intestinal system is digesting, you're either going to get a better sense that it's time to make serotonin or a weaker sense, right? And it's unique because like a lot of things, OCD, a lot of intense anxieties, you'll find that people sometimes they really do crave these experiences of carbohydrates. But the carbohydrates that they'll consume are processed, and processing any food, but processed foods really agitate the gut biome, which is, if you think about it, the system that is going to, the way that we get information from our gut. So if that's screwed up, our brain doesn't actually know how to make some of these neurotransmitters the way we're supposed to. So again, so if you think about it in rhythm, if I'm awake in a normal 24-hour cycle in the morning, I want to try to have healthy fats and proteins, whatever I can tolerate, to produce more L-tyrosine, produce L-dopa and dopamine. And then in the evening, to quiet my body down is to have maybe carbohydrates then, right? To have carbohydrates then, or starches. And you really don't want to have processed foods or processed breads, and because those are not necessarily going to provide the same quality to some degree. So hopefully that makes some degree of sense. I know it's, and again, like, you have to figure out what is right for you. There is not like one way to do this. I think a lot of times people are, well, this is the way, and that's not realistic, because you're going to see a lot of fluctuation and a lot of vacillation within what it is that you're trying to do. Some people are not going to want to eat certain foods in the morning, and that's fine. But you want to figure out how you can, where you can make these changes, where you can make these switches, and so that's important. In a couple minutes, we're going to talk about how to change essentially like what our gut desires, because our body actually gives us a sense, gives us a desire for certain types of foods based on how we have been eating or how we've even been raised with certain types of foods, right? So our gut sends these signals to the brain of we want more of these things. And especially when it comes to dopamine a lot of times is the thing that if we consume a food that has dopamine, right? So sugar is one of those things. And sugar is, people get very concerned about this, that sugar is in everything, and that in many ways that's true. But because sugar produces dopamine in various quantities, what it does is oftentimes people want to eat more and more of it because it produces dopamine, which the brain naturally just would like to crave it, right? So there's an activation in the mind. And so we want to be mindful of what we're consuming. And, if you are a person who starts your day and you start your day from a fasted state, right? You're not eating during the night and you wake up, and then the first thing that you consume is something that has like a lot of carbohydrates or sugars, there's going to be a spike in insulin. And the mind's response for most people is to speed up and to be hypoglycemic, meaning that you're going to have like really vicious mood swings most of the day or crashes. So again, another benefit to I think starting with more of these dense proteins and fats if you can earlier. Now, another thing that I thought was fascinating from like the research about, and this is with having to do with depression, was that there was a lot of research done with omega-3s and omega-6s in the ratio, right? So omega-3s, these are things that you're going to find in fish oil, krill oil, chia seeds, flax seeds, right? I'm not a big seed person. We don't ingest a lot of these seeds. I think my wife is, in some ways, she's ahead of me in some regards because she's been studying the effect of these seeds and these omega-3s on, her body for a long time. And so that I think is an important component, is knowing if you have a higher level of omega-3s to omega-6s, right? So I think it's like 1,000 milligrams of omega-3, right? 1,000 milligrams of this fish oil. Some people obviously find fish oil disgusting. So again, you can get it in other sources. You find that people's experiences of depression symptoms are reduced, in part because of the way that the omega-3, omega-6 reaction actually activates. If you think about that vagus nerve, there's information that is relayed between your heart and your brain, right? And there's what we call heart rate variability, which activates between, it's a neurological response between the heart in the brain, and it activates in that way where people are, they're actually like they're seeing a better response to even antidepressants that they might have resisted, right? So let's say a person was given something like Paxil or Zoloft or whatnot, one of these serotonin reuptake inhibitors or an SSRI, and maybe they were resistant to it, like it didn't do much, but when they changed the levels of omega-3s, they take in more fish oil or more flaxseed, or krill or chia seeds or whatnot. They're alleviating the depression, and they're more responsive to the antidepressant. That maybe it didn't work as well, but now all of a sudden it is. Super interesting. And again, all the mechanisms for this, I think that the research, again, this is the research that these doctors and neurologists and biochemists are doing. So very unique with that. So if you're looking at options to bring in more of these omega-3s into your life, because that seems to improve mental health, and it also just, I think it seems to improve other functions as well. So that's something I want you to think about. So that's another, so maybe some, fish oil. And again, there's liquid forms of fish oil. There's also pill forms and capsule forms of fish oil. You have to be careful about what you take in and the purity of it, because obviously, especially with the fish, is you have to be mindful of the mercury. And there are ways to test for that. The easiest way to test if like there's purity of your fish oil is, again, is if you bite a capsule in it and you want to spit it out because it's rancid. Well, that's terrible. Obviously, you got to buy it to pull that one off. But if you're averse to fish oil in general, I mean, my kids take it. My younger kids have taken it. They flavored it, made it so that it is much more palatable and tolerable. The fish oils, and it's cheaper in liquid form. It's a little bit more pricey and potable though in encapsulation. And again, I think that for men specifically that are trying to maintain testosterone over their life, the fish oil is also helpful for, it seems like, the sex hormones and the production, because we need these omega-3s and these fatty acids to produce testosterone. And I would assume for women as well. So that's the other thing, right? And so the other thing I wanted to kind of share with you guys is there's a thing called L-carnitine. L-carnitine is a molecule. It's not really something that is new. Again, I'm talking about this in, I guess, overly, maybe, sciencey fashion, but these are things that are found in different foods as well. So like, you can get these all in supplementation, but if you can consume it in a natural food, it'd be great. But usually you get L-carnitine through lean meats, right? You get it through eggs or legumes, right? So beans and peas. You can get it through nuts and, again, seeds. These, again, when you look at seeds and nuts, you see a lot of things. Soy has L-carnitine as well. People have different preferences for foods. Like I said, look up these things. What is palatable? What is on your current choice of activation for food preferences? Now, the thing about I think about L-carnitine is that it obviously improves mood, right? And so, but it has had a lot of like unique things that I saw in the research. Like, number one is it has like people that consume more L-carnitine or they take the supplementation, especially, it raises their rates of pregnancy because it improves the sperm quality and it actually the egg quality, right? And so the sperm mobility goes up, and then the ovarian and the ovaries improve. It also actually like reduces, like, at least from which I thought was kind of wild, is like what is it, polycystic ovarian problems go down when people consume more L-carnitine, or women consume more L-carnitine. So these are things that people need to like look at and talk to their doctor about. But it's a unique thing. It also, like, it affects it was seen to reduce some of the effects and behaviors associated with autism and fibromyalgia and migraines, right? So these things, right? These lean meats, and you'll see people they're going on these lion diets and stuff. But again, just because someone does that, and this is the misleading thing, you'll watch on TV or on your Instagram feed, people are doing the lion diet and losing all this weight. That doesn't mean that's going to happen to you. That works with their biology and their genetics. Same thing for some people. They lose a lot of weight and feel great on a plant-based diet. And some people feel terrible. And again, You really, I can't stress this enough. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. But these are basic things that, again, if we ingest these things, the L-carnitine appears to also, it continues to elevate mood, and it has all these other positive side effects. Now, the last thing I kind of wanted to share with you guys today is this idea of the gut microbiome, which is essentially like the whole body is a series of tubes, right? Our mouth is a tube that goes into our esophagus, and our stomach is a tube, and our intestines are a tube, and then obviously comes out the other end. So we have all these tubes, and as we get to the end, all of the tubes of the body, especially the intestinal body, right? I mean, the brain's a tube too; it's just all curled up. But the body, like throughout, there's what we call mucosal lining, and I don't know, like a metaphor, I guess, that I think might be helpful is just to think about it is that there's obviously a mucosal lining, and then there's also kind of a microbial lining, right? So there's there's microbes there, and some of them are good, and they do a lot of good things. You can also alter them where they're not good, right? But we know that if our microbiome is healthy, and so think about it is that the microbiomes are always, it's kind of like they constantly are trying to create an environment where that they are, it's almost like they're making a bed. They're trying to make a nice little like nest or a bed so that they can create more of themselves to populate themselves, right? And we want to create the best environment so we have the best type of microbiome. So because it affects our immune system, it affects our inflammation response, it affects our digestion, our metabolism, you name it, right? So the better your microbiome, usually the better you're going to fare in general for health, because again, it's your infections, everything is involved in that area. So what do we do? Well, so some people take probiotics, right? And I think probiotics are good. I take them. I know a lot of people that take them. You can ingest probiotics, different ways. You can do it through yogurts. You can do it through capsulations. You can do it through fermented foods like sauerkraut or kombucha or anything. And there's every culture has, again, a lot of fermented foods produce these probiotics, right? And so there's this idea that but you don't necessarily want to take too much either, right? Too much of anything isn't good. So if you take a lot of probiotic or whatnot, you're going to end up getting brain fog, and you're going to kind of feel funky, and it's not a great idea to just make it you know to go overboard with anything, right? And so you just got to always do things in balance. And but that is a really powerful way to remove or reduce the amount of inflammation. So a couple other things though. So the other thing about like the gut microbiome that I think a lot of people, I've heard it a couple times, is they'll say like artificial sweeteners destroy the gut microbiome. And the only thing I saw was that saccharin, I think it's called saccharin, which is an artificial sweetener, had damaging effects on the gut microbiome. So there's other things, obviously, like people take, but as far as I can tell, as far as I saw, there's really like, I know that like stevia and different kinds of things, that doesn't look like it affects the microbiome. Now, you notice like if the microbiome is agitated or it isn't doing maybe what you'd like it to do, you're constipated or you have frequent IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that, your mood is going to be either agitated or you're going to be depressed. And in part because like, well, biologically, like you're just not doing well. So you really want to be attentive to what's going on interiorly to your intestinal tract. One of the big things that is a culprit both to weight gain and altering like the mind-body connection is the ingestion of more processed foods. And in the research, the more heavily processed foods that you eat, obviously the more that your body is going to overconsume, because it seems to trick the body in some ways. Maybe it's maybe it's a chemical thing. I mean, I think somebody with a higher level of understanding biologically could explain it to you, but I think that for the most part, like we want to avoid processed foods or at least reduce it to as minimal as possible, because it seems like it has a huge level of disruption in terms of our gut microbiome. And it starts to make our gut crave things that are essentially bad for our body. So then we end up having higher levels of obesity, higher level, more insulin sensitivity, all this stuff that puts us in a state for pre-diabetes, and we feel more lethargic, right? Sometimes. So really want to, again, avoid all of the processed foods. You'll find that they seem to start to increase the inflammation markers. And that I think that that's a really big deal. Avoid that stuff, So keep your eye on that. And again, I'm not going to say that, like, well, this thing, to be hard and fast and say, well, never do this or never do that. Obviously, like, there has to be some flexibility, but you have to understand that what you put into your body is going to affect you. And the more that you put certain foods into your body, you're going to alter the microbiome. It's gonna those little micro cells are going to want different foods and crave different foods based on what you experience, right? So, if you think about it, you've got this experience where you're putting in, certain processed foods. Well, that gut bacteria is going to maybe evolve or advance based on that processed food to really not serve your body very well, right? Your digestion, your metabolism, all that stuff is going to be jacked up. So again, it's hard though to eat whole foods. It's hard not to process anything. Remember, processing food doesn't mean you're just going to McDonald's or that you're getting a Stouffer's pizza. It has to do with, it's like if I take a piece of broccoli and I put a piece of broccoli in the microwave, that is a process where I've removed something from the food or altered the food. So I think a lot of times people don't understand what I mean by processed food. They think that I'm putting some kind of like weird chemical on it or something. That's not what I mean. So, but we want to try to not alter the foods we put into our body as much as possible when preferred and when safe, right? So eating raw broccoli as opposed to microwaving the crap out of it, right? Again, if you're eating broccoli, good for you. If I could get my kids to eat broccoli, well, some of my kids eat broccoli. Some of my kids need to eat more greens. And I'm sure a lot of people who watch this, your kids need to eat some more greens too. So that is something that I want you to think. So not all of artificial sweeteners are bad, and you need to realize that there's going to be individual food differences, right? So I think some people can tolerate certain things, like dairy. Dairy is a good example of this. Is that, like, there are people that they are just not going to tolerate dairy. Like, I have a different genetic makeup than my wife. My wife really struggles with consuming dairy. Sometimes she's okay with it, sometimes she's not. And I'll talk a little bit about why that sometimes switches for people. But in general, you have to be aware of what your body tolerates, what your body prefers. When it comes to a healthy diet, right? Is it the Mediterranean diet? Is it the ketogenic diet? And again, there are benefits to all, but the thing is, you have to find what works best for your biochemistry and your genetics. Please do not look at other people or what people tell you as being that this is going to be the the panacea for your health or for weight loss or for your diet. Again, I'm not even talking about weight loss on this. I'm just talking about mood and the gut and brain activation. But you need to know how your brain responds to certain foods. Like, if I consume certain things, I get incredibly depressed, and I need to know what those foods are. And again, a lot of times they're very dense in sugar, processed sugar. So when we're thinking about the gut microbiome, I want you to think that everybody has a specific kind of balance that they have to try to produce in their own body. So some people, they might do better with Mediterranean diet or plant-based diet or a meat-focused diet or keto. Those different diets, again, they're going to affect the microbiome. Probiotics will help with the establishment of the good bacterial sources in that lining of the gut, so that sensory connection between the gut and the brain produce the right types of neurochemicals, the right types of neurotransmitters, and we feel better. And we want to make sure it removes the inflammation. And the more inflammation the body has, the more at risk we are for poor immune system functioning. So cancer rates go up. Our metabolism, if our inflammation is up, our metabolism usually goes down a lot of the time. So one of the things that like people have also done that's important to note is people have been into this real, I guess it's become very trendy, and there's a lot of really interesting science about fasting. And some people do a day's worth of fasting, some people do half a day's worth of fasting. Again, again, you have to find out what works for you. But the intermittent fasting and fasting cycles, there is an understanding that when you are doing versions of fasting, that it actually the body starts to digest the gut microbiomes, right? So essentially, like it cleans out the microbiomes of the gut. And so the concern is like, well, is that a good thing? Well, now I've wiped out all of my good bacteria. And sometimes it's really healthy because the gut bacteria that you had was bad, right? It was infected. It wasn't a good crop of bacteria, right? So like you now your body's absorbed that, got consumed during your fast. It gets rid of those cells, it consumes them, and so then when it repopulates and it's healthier, right, for some people. So it's not always bad. Sometimes people think that fasting is going to destroy the microbiome. But again, like you have to find out what works for you, and sometimes it is healthy with these fasting protocols really to permit that, because again, now all of a sudden your mood might go up, or you might find yourself very, very fatigued and very much drained, and your mood very low. Again, these are things that you need to be mindful of. So some people find a lot more energy when they're fasting, and then they consume food. And when they first consume food or come off of their fast, they don't feel as good, right? They were feeling better when they were fasting and not feeling as good with the reconsumption of food. And it's really because that gut microbiome needs to be rebuilt. And so you see this, I know in my life, like we've done different protocols for food and fasting and cleaning up the diet. And sometimes because now all of a sudden we've taken away certain foods, the gut microbiome cannot tolerate, like, let's say, dairy or certain types of foods. And sometimes it's really good because it makes it aversive to processed foods now. It's like, oh, I can't have the super sweet thing I used to have, or maybe there's certain things that aren't good for you. So again, in a recap, I want you to think like we have these two systems. We have the dopaminergic system, the alert system, and there are food choices that can elevate the mood. You want to elevate our mood while we're awake. And we want to use the serotonergic system. We want to increase serotonin as we want to be calm at bedtime or in the evening when we want to sleep. And so the more starchy foods, right? The omega-3s, the ratio more omega-3s to omega-6s, whether it's flax or fish oil or whatever it is, that helps to improve mood and help with the depressive symptoms. And also the L-carnitine, if we're looking to improve our overall, mood state and our energy levels, right? And getting these things from different food sources, lean meats, and especially again when we think about, I didn't remember to say this, but with the omega-3s and again in the L-carnitine. So when you eat lean meats, a lot of times, like people will say, like, if those animals that you consume, you want to make sure it's grass-fed. Why? Because that hopefully the animals ate grass that was rich in omega-3s, so you take in the nutrients, right? Understanding your food choices is a super big deal. Processed meats versus grass-fed meats, super different in terms of the way your body makes certain biochemicals, right? And again, hopefully this makes sense, as a good kind of maybe some biomechanisms for you to improve your mood or change what you've been consuming. I really do encourage people to reduce all processed foods in your diet. Again, you can't escape all of it, but you really want to reduce it because of the inflammation markers and the fact that it jams up this mind-body connection through the gut and the vagus nerve. And we want a healthy connection so we have a good immune system, a regulated metabolism, and that our brain can sense the different organs and activate them appropriately, so we have the optimal function. So again, if you want to go into a deep dive in any of these areas, check out examine.com, where you're going to get a lot of periodicals and peer-reviewed information from established journals, Cell, Cell's One Journal, and various other ones that are there. But I hope this is helpful, and go out and smuggle some hope wherever you can. Take care.